Hello and welcome to another Victoria 3 Dev Diary day, and yeah, this is looking like it's a pretty good one. I am looking forward to delving into employment and qualifications. Of course, I'll bring you into Twitter first to have a look at Martin Anward's most recent Twitter teaser, and it's looking pretty cool. It's not exactly a whole bunch. Actually, I just need to turn that off so you can see the whole thing. There we go. There's not a whole lot being shown, admittedly. We're basically just seeing the qualifications or potential qualifications in Smolensk. But, you know, it's just showing something very interesting in my opinion, and that is just how much better the UI is. Like, I've gone over this point previously, but what we've had in the past has been really awkward tooltips that have been, awkward. I don't know how best to say it. It's really awkward tooltips that have been awkward, yeah. But if this tooltip here was shown maybe 5 or 6 dev diaries ago, you could imagine that instead of being aristocrats number per month, it would be the amount of potential qualifications in Smolensk for aristocrats would be this amount per month. The amount of potential qualifications in Smolensk would be of capitalists would be this per month. The amount of potential freaking officers in Smolensk would be this much per month. And, that's kind of the thing that we had with the previous tooltips. And they really weren't great. But this is clean. This is gorgeous. This is much, much better. And I'm, like I say, I really appreciate the huge step up in the tooltips compared to the earlier teasers. And they're just, much cleaner, much more legible. They are just straight up better. So, without further ado as well, then, let us get into the dev diary itself. But before that, what is this? Is this new images? I think it is. Let's have a look at this as well. That's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. Let me just take away me just so you can see it even better. Look at that. Look at that industry. It's fantastic. I don't know why I'm so enamored by this. I don't know. I love it. Massive hulking bits of industry. I don't know. Just whets the whistle. But anyway, that's another thing out of the way. Let us move back on to the dev diary itself. So, I need to sort this bit out. Dev diary capture, turn that back on. There we go. So, we're talking about employment and qualifications in the 11th dev diary of the game. Happy Thursday! I know it's Friday as I am recording this, but again, that is just to show the dev comments at the end, and judging by the responses I had to previously asking about that, people do appreciate that I wait the extra day to get the dev comments in. People are seemingly on the same page as me on that one, which is nice. So, welcome to another deep dive into the guts of Victoria 3's economic machinery. This week we'll be talking about pop professions, specifically how and why pops change profession. While this is an automatic process, the mechanics of it are still crucial knowledge to keep in the back of your head when building your society. Perhaps you want to ensure the population in one of your states are able to take on machinist jobs before embarking on a rapid industrialization project there. Or perhaps you want to ensure you don't accidentally enable too much social mobility in a country already prone to uprisings against their true and lawful king. First, a quick recap. In the Pops dev diary, we learned that all Pops have a profession, which determines their social strata and influences a number of things like wages, political strength, and interest group affiliations. In the Buildings dev diary, we learned that buildings need Pops of specific professions to work there in order for them to produce their intended effects on the economy and society. And finally, in the Production Methods dev diary, we learned that different production methods change the number of profession positions available in a building. So how do Pops get assigned to these spots? Our approach here differs a bit from the previous game. Victoria 1 and 2 had the concept of a pop type, a fundamental property of pops in those games that defines most aspects of their existence, what function they perform in society, what goods they need to survive, versus what goods they desire, what ideologies they espouse, etc. Pops in Victoria 2 autonomously change into other types over time depending on their finances and the various needs and aspects of their country. Providing access to luxury goods in your country permits POPs to promote more easily. Generally speaking, higher tier POPs will provide better bonuses for your country as different POP types perform different functions. By manufacturing or importing special goods and educating your population, you would turn your simple backwards POPs into advanced, progressive types in ideal ratios, which maximizes these bonuses to increase your competitive advantage. And we're just showing the Victoria 2 POPs here of aristocrats, artisans, bureaucrats, blah, blah, blah. You can see them all here. I did prefer the way that the mod, Historical Project mod for Victoria did it. Instead of it being clergymen, they changed it to actually being intellectuals, which it was just more neutral across the board. I felt like that was a better change. But for the other part, officers, no one likes them. They're garbage. But other than that, yeah, it was cool. Just seeing Blast from the past. But look at these new symbols. Ooh. Ooh. Are these all individual emotes? Because I kind of hope that it is. These are all individual. Oh, they're not. But it is a PNG, so you could totally easily split them off. That is definitely... some of these are definitely going to get used. Like this one here. Oh, that's going to be an emote on my Discord very soon. Anyway, Victoria 3 POPs instead have professions. These are in some way similar to POP type, but the ideal ratios and economic functions of these professions differ based on the building they're employed in and the production methods activated. The fundamental difference between these two approaches becomes clear when considering the bureaucratic POP type profession in Victoria 2 and 3. In both games, bureaucrats increase a country's administrative ability, but in Victoria 2, POPs had to promote into bureaucrats independently in relation to the amount of administrative spending the player sets, while in Victoria 3, POPs will only become bureaucrats if there are available bureaucrat jobs in government buildings, usually as a result of the player actively expanding government administrations. Yeah, that's kind of lovely. That's kind of lovely. I'm okay with it. I think generally what I would say here is that functionally the only real difference here is in Victoria 2 you didn't have to build the bureaucratic building, right? You didn't have to build the government buildings or what's it called, the administrative office, I think. Or sorry, government administrations. You didn't have to build those, and it was mostly a case of if you wanted more bureaucrats, you would do the state promotion of bureaucrats in a province or in a state or whichever one it was. It was fine. It was just kind of awkward. It's like, oh, I've reached the magic 2% of clergymen or intellectuals or bureaucrats or whatever it is I'm wanting. Gotta switch over to something else to encourage clerks, and it got very tedious after you've got your initial 2% clergy. The rest of it just kind of became a bit meh, you know? But functionally, what the player is going to be dealing with here doesn't seem too very different, other than, you know, reducing that kind of tedium. The bureaucrats are still going to promote into bureaucrats, but now they're doing it because there is a job available, rather than because you have made an active decision to encourage bureaucracy. I suppose it makes functional difference when you're talking about, you know, more changes going on at once, right? Because in Victoria 2, of course, you could not encourage both soldiers and bureaucrats, but you may have a building called a barracks or a garrison or whatever the building is that you can build in Victoria 3 that encourages more soldiers. I feel that's a lot more immersive and a lot more tangible, I guess is the word, to encourage the growth of soldiers by putting a soldiery barracks, a fort, or whatever it is in an area. Because obviously you're not going to have a whole lot of people signing up to join the military in a place where the military don't have a presence. And the same for bureaucracy, you know? It's a lot more tangible. People are becoming bureaucrats because there is jobs available for them. People are becoming soldiers because there are jobs available for them. People are becoming X because there are X available for them. That is a lot more tangible than a magic I encourage violence. No, I encourage bureaucracy. You know, I like this. You know, based on the buildings, that's good. That's better. And here are the professions we have indeed. So academics, aristocrats, bureaucrats, capitalists, clergymen is a temporary icon, will be changed to be more universally applicable. They could just make it be, you know, the Islamic moon, the crescent moon, if it's that, or the Hindu thing. Blanking on what it's called, the Buddhist wheel. Oh, you know, they could have it localized. But yeah, making it... The thing is, they don't need clergymen. They could just change it into something generic. Intellectuals or something, I don't know. But then we also have clerks, engineers, farmers, labourers, machinists, officers, peasants, servicemen, shopkeepers, and slaves. And these are professions and not pop types. Yeah, so it's an interesting method of going about it. I suppose it leaves pop types to be a bit more free, right? Because a pop is not their job. A person is not the job. Unless you talk to a capitalist, then, you know, that is their entire personality. But generally, people are not defined by their jobs. They've got more interests, they've got more needs, they've got more stuff going on about them rather than just their job. So definitely, I think this is an improvement over the previous system from what I can tell from here. The latter approach gives the player more control over where these jobs opportunities are created, and combined with production methods cause demographic shifts to have stronger, more localized effects that are easier to predict and understand. It's also more flexible, permitting the same profession to cause different effects in different buildings given different production methods. So in Victoria 3, higher paid pops don't by their very nature perform a more valuable societal function than lower paid pops. Rather, each acts as a crucial part of a production method's recipe. Each of these roles requires the other to be more effective. Without enough labourers to shovel coal, the engines the machinists maintain stay dormant, while without seamstresses to work sewing machines, the shopkeepers don't have any clothes to sell. Well, this is definitely more realistic, right? Victoria 3, higher pay pops don't by their very nature perform a more valuable societal function than lower pay pops. That's the same as real life. Like, objectively the same as real life. Right? Because, these guys, more important than these guys. You can tell my own political leanings kind of bleeding through now, can't you? All of these guys more important than the one I'm missing out. You know, I'm just saying that, you know, it's more realistic that, you know, just because you're higher paid doesn't mean you're more important. Although I wouldn't say that in Victoria 2 that was the case, right? If we go back to here, what is a useless pop type? Officers. They were garbage. Absolute garbage. Because of the way that, you know, leaders or, you know, generals and admirals were created, yeah, you got more if you had more officers. But man, that system is a whole bunch of wank. They're just garbage. It's something that you would want to actively avoid using at all costs. So yeah, I would say that these guys are useless, but if you don't have enough clerks and craftsmen, then you're kind of fucked in your economy and you can't make shit. And they, you know, these guys are paid less than the officers. I would say that they're also more important than the capitalists, because going into laissez-faire was just an absolute abomination. So yeah, I can point out several cases, even in Victoria 2, where higher paid pops are not more important. But yeah, no, it's good. It's more realistic. So I mean, that's what we want, right? Rather, each acts as a crucial part of the production method's recipe. Yeah, we read that. Okay. Buildings adjust their wages over time in order to achieve full employment with minimal wage costs. Very realistic as well. How do you make more profit? If you're a capitalist, you'll know this. It's not by making a better product, not by making the efficiency of said product better. It's by reducing your costs. And the best way to reduce your costs is to reduce the amount you pay the people who make the shit that you sell. So, minimal wage costs, very Very realistic. Very realistic. Again, my own political leanings may be bleeding through. Fucking deal with it. It's a Look, if I play Victoria 3 and you don't get to guess my fucking political leanings, I'm not playing Victoria 3. Let's be fair. It is what it is. It is what it is. As employment increases, so does the throughput, the degree by which the building consumes input goods and produces output goods. By the laws of supply and demand, this makes building less profitable per capita the closer to full employment it gets, so at first blush it might appear irrational for a building to pay more wages just to reduce their margins. But since a building does not represent a single factory, but rather a whole industrial sector across a large area, and we assume the individual businesses in that sector compete with each other rather than engage in cartel behavior to extort customers, this adjustment of wages to maximize employment makes sense. That works for me. That's fine by me. However, buildings won't increase wages due to labour competition if this would cause them to go into deficit, so there's a little point to expanding industries beyond the point where they're profitable. And we did see a little bit of that in the previous dev diary as well. Employees are hired into available jobs from the pool of POPs that already exist in the state, but unless they're employed, these POPs will already have a job somewhere doing something else. POPs can be hired under two conditions. First, they must be offered a measurably higher wage than the wage they're currently getting from their current employment. Second, unless they already work as their required profession in another building, they must also meet the qualifications of that profession to change into it. So we're looking at these steel mills here. They don't pay as well as the arms industries, but they do seem to offer better terms than the textile mills and resource industries in the same state, with the notable exception of fishing wharves, who also need machinists to serve their trawlers. So let's see if we can pass that information from here. They have employment of 6,000 out of the potential 10,000. And you see the breakdown, although... This is I'm not sure this, I mean, it's got all the information it needs to be. But man, it's a bit hard to read. Okay, so, it doesn't pay as well as the armed industry, so I imagine it's going to lose POPs to the arms industry, yeah. Negative 177 go to the arms industry, negative 80 to there, negative 20 capitalists. Offer better terms than the textile mills, so they're taking 20 capitalists from the textile mills, but that's it from the textile mills. There's some subsistence farms, opium plantations, fishing wharves there. Notable exception, the fishing wharves who also need machinists. So they've lost machinists to the fishing wharves, but they've also gained 26 machinists from the fishing wharves, so they've like swapped over? And 34 have become engineers. Yeah, this, like, you can imagine, right, in-game, this is not going to be as big as this tooltip is. This tooltip is going to be much smaller. And already, I can tell, this here is the symbol for engineers. It's this. And it's basically illegible. You cannot really tell what it is. This is a bit of an iffy tooltip. It doesn't look amazing. How would I fix it? Honestly, I think the best way one would fix it is by turning it into a, like an Excel spreadsheet, because we need more of those in Paradox games. But honestly, if just everything was lined up, it would be so much easier to read. You can get rid of this used to be and became, all that garbage, right? You would have used to be, is now, from, to, a number, or any that's the basic information that's necessary, and it'd just be lined up, and it'd just be so much easier to read. I think. Is this a tooltip that you're generally going to be reading a lot of, though, is the question. Maybe. Maybe. Am I going to be looking at this a lot? And does it matter that this is a bit iffy? I mean, they've got right-click to open context menu on a tooltip. So that's interesting. We're locking tooltips in place and then right-clicking to open a context menu. Maybe you can right-click them on capitalists and it'll tell you shit about them. Or maybe click on shopkeepers to tell you shit about those. That could be cool. That could make this a lot easier, or make all of the game a bit easier for new players. Clicking on maybe the fishing wharves, instead of bringing you to fishing wharves in general, it'll bring you to the specific fishing wharves that these machinists used to be in, or these engineers used to be in. That could be a thing. That could be a thing. Maybe. I don't know. Hang on. Look at this again, right? We've got some machinists in the fishing wharves have promoted to engineers and moved to the steel mills, but then existing machinists in the steel mill just moved over to fishing wharves and didn't get promoted. Is that what I'm seeing here? I think it is. And then it lost a lot of machinists in the steel mill to go to the arms industry because it doesn't pay as well. It doesn't tell you why they're moving, I guess, is the thing. Maybe the context menu is going to tell you why they're moving, and that's why we've got... Or maybe this is just... We've looked at the reasons why this is happening, and we're going to tell you a little story about it, and that's purely for the dev diary. Maybe. It could be that way. But... Yeah, I could see where things could be a little bit awkward here, but in general, it's fine. I mean, it gives you the information. It just maybe could be laid out in a bit better way. Wages are set by individual buildings in response to market conditions. A building that is losing money will decrease wages until it's back in the black. A building that has open jobs it can't seem to fill will raise wages until it either fills the necessary positions or runs out of excess profits. As a result, different buildings in the same state will compete for the available workforce. What this means in practice is that a large population with the necessary qualifications to perform all of the jobs being created in the state will keep wages depressed and profits high. Only when industries are large or advanced enough that they need to compete with each other for a limited pool of qualified workers are wages forced to rise. This rise in wages also comes with increased consumption, which increases demand for goods and services that some of the same buildings may profit from in the end. Alright, so it's kind of like a nice feedback loop. I like that. I like that a lot. Okay. A pop's qualifications measure how many of its workforce qualify for certain professions and updates monthly depending on how well their current properties match up to the expectations of the profession in question. For example, at least a basic education level is required to become a machinist, while a much higher one is required to become an engineer. Conversely, the ability to become an aristocrat is less about education, no shit, and more about social class and wealth. Buildings won't hire pops who don't meet the qualifications for the profession in question. So again, looking here, there are 981 machinists qualifying to become engineers at a rate of 4.08 per month. Their literacy is nothing to write home about, but at least they meet the cutoff of 20%, aren't starving to death, and benefit substantially from already working in an adjacent field. All factors and numbers are a work in progress. So, 20% literacy is pretty low. But anyway, is 4.08 what? 4.808 machinists? 4.808% of this 981 machinists? I mean, it says here, a basic education level is required to become a machinist. A much higher one is required to become an engineer, but a much higher one is just 22%. Is that a thing? Being in an adjacent field is huge, though. Being a machinist is 3.33, whereas just being literate is 0.28. Like, if that goes up to 100%, that still doesn't go much higher than 1, whereas this is 3. So that's kind of insane, that level. And then for the workforce size, 1 per 1,000 it looks like. 4.08 of the workforce become engineers due to 4.16 due to pop attributes. So why is the the rest of the 0.08 not changing over? No idea. Adults with adequate literacy can become engineers. Potential increases with greater literacy and wealth. Machinists and clerks have a particularly easy time becoming engineers. I guess this is another thing that's just going to become clear when you start playing the game. Maybe. Or maybe it just doesn't matter, and that the exact individual numbers don't matter for the vast majority of people, and it's just going to work out regardless. That could be the case as well. If some paper mills required more engineers and this pop was being considered, only the amount of qualified engineers they've accumulated so far could be hired. Currently, this is only about 85, which is not shown. If those 85 were all hired, this pop would then end up with only 896 members left in the workforce, of which 0 now qualify to become engineers. Since all recently hired engineers used to be machinists, all 85 retain their machinist qualifications. Furthermore, if 512 members of this pop qualified to be farmers before the hire, of the 85 of them who were newly promoted to engineers, 44 of these new engineers are also qualified to become farmers. Huh, so what do you need to... Is there literally qualifications that you have for each pop? I can't imagine that would be the case. If 512 members of the pop used to be qualified to be farmers, of the 85, half of... more than half. Yeah, 52% of 85 is 44, apparently. Maybe it's rounding up. Alright, that's some interesting math. I don't know how that's going to work out. Maybe you require a couple more reads through, I guess. To be considered for a job as an aristocrat, a pop must have at least moderate wealth, and the more wealth they have, the faster they will develop this potential. Unlike many other jobs, literacy is not a requirement for being accepted into the aristocracy, but an education does make it easier. Bureaucrats and officers have an easier time becoming aristocrats than other members of society, while pops who suffer discrimination on account of their culture have a much harder time. Finally, if a pop does not meet the minimum wealth requirement, they actually devolve any prior potential for becoming aristocrats. That means that down-and-out former nobles robbed of their land and forced to go unemployed or become a wage labourer will over time lose the ability to return their former social class. All factors and numbers are a work in progress. Okay, it does then seem like pops individually have qualifications. Yeah, there's a monthly change in qualifications that we're looking at. So it's not they will become engineers, it's that they will be qualified to become engineers. So each month, 0.3% of the work... Is it percent? It doesn't... I don't know. 0.3 unspecifiedness of the workforce become aristocrats, or qualified to become aristocrats, due to wealth, better literacy, and from being officers. Discrimination against the Sudanese makes it go down massively. And then from the workforce size of 250, so 0.25 of 1,000. So yeah, this part is from 1,000. And then you can see what makes someone become aristocrats. Alright. I don't really understand the math massively, because this number needs some qualifications on that. I need to qualify this number. But that otherwise, yeah, sure, they can promote and demote, they become qualified, they get hired into different places. Okay. You can be qualified to be something without being hired to be something. If that makes sense, right? Because we have here 34 machinists became engineers. They didn't have to, though. They could have stayed as machinists. They'd just be qualified to be engineers when the engineer job opened up. And if maybe the steel mill changes its production methods to no longer require engineers, these new engineers can become machinists once more because they still are qualified to be machinists. But they wouldn't be able to jump over to capitalists because they don't have the qualifications to be a capitalist. Whatever the fuck qualifications to be a capitalist is. Ruthless bastardry or something like that, I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm starting to understand it. I think I'm starting to understand it. Like all pop attributes, qualifications follow the pops as they split, merge, move between buildings, migrate, and die. If you'd previously developed a lot of potential bureaucrats in your country, but ran into budgetary problems and had to shut down your schools, over time, those pops who had already developed the qualifications to become bureaucrats will die off and not be replaced by newly educated ones. If your capitalists in a given state have been underpaying their local discriminated employees to the degree that nobody gained the qualifications to take over for them, and some of those capitalists move away to operate newly opened iron mines next state over, rather than promoting some of the local discriminated labourers to the newly opened jobs, they'll simply leave the spots open and the mines underproducing until qualified capitalists move in from elsewhere to take over. Alright. Yes, the capitalists leaving the mine is what makes them underproduce. Yeah, sure. Qualifications are entirely moddable by simply providing the computational factors that should go into determining how the value develops each month. If you want to make a mod to split up the clergyman profession into individual variants for each religion in the game, you could make the imam profession dependent on the pop being Sunni or Shiite. If you wanted aristocratic qualification development to be highly dependent on the amount of unproductive arable land in the state the pop lives in, you could do that. An event option or decision that makes it faster and easier to educate engineers but harder to educate officers for the next 10 years? Absolutely. I like that. You know, more moddable the better. And now we have a breakdown of all pops in Lower Egypt that are qualified to become engineers. Of course, any openings will be offered to existing engineers first, but not all of the remaining qualified pops would actually be interested in the job. Though if it was lucrative enough, perhaps some aristocrats on a failing subsistence farm would consider a career change. Alright. So potentially qualified engineers is 9,000. It would hire from existing engineers first and then go for this list of people. Not everyone would want to switch. So if you will make a fuck ton of money, like this guy, aristocratic subsistence farm, then you may not want to, but maybe you will if it's more profitable for you as a pop. Yeah, I can see that. I think mostly this number is going to be the most important, and this is just like too much yellow writing in a and 74 more items. Jesus Christ. The intent of qualifications is to signal to a player what capacity for employment they have available among any subset of their population. They cannot, for example, conquer a state filled with undereducated people they also legally discriminate against and expect to immediately build up cutting-edge manufacturing and trade centres there. These efforts will be throttled by their inability to employ the locals into highly qualified positions, meaning they will have to wait for members of their already qualified workforce to migrate there from the old country to take on any high-status positions created for them. But by building out their education system, paying bureaucracy to extend their administrative reach to the new state through incorporation, and changing their laws to extend citizenship to these new residents, they can start to build this capacity also in the locals. So one thing that I find very funny is when I think it was mentioned at PDXCon in the panel that they had, one of the big things that a few subsets of the community took away from it is like, Victoria 3 will have a racism mechanic, and some people were like, oh yeah, that's super cool. I like being racist and something like that. Others were, that's cool because it's historically accurate and stuff. I do find it funny that the people who are liking it because, yay, my fantasy to be racist in the game is going to be, rewarded, and then I'm looking at this and like, no, racism just it don't pay. It just don't pay. You wanna take over a bit of land that you are personally racist against. Well, it's gonna be pretty shit land for you unless you stop being racist. And if you stop being racist, then you're gonna have to be not have to, but you're gonna be able to make a profit off this place. But only if you stop being racist. I do like that. That does tickle the funny bone. And obviously, big disclaimer, I'm not saying that this subset of people is huge. I'm not saying it's the majority. It's a tiny fucking subset. But it exists, and these people are very funny. Not intentionally, though. In summary, qualifications is the mechanism by which to access education and your stance on discrimination. in addition to many other factors, impact your ability to expand different parts of your society. It's also a mechanism that sorts pops logically into the economic and thereby political niches you carve out as you expand, ensuring your laws and economic conditions inform the social mobility of pops based on who they are. It's quite subtle, and you might not even notice it's there until you run into the challenges caused by rapid industrialization, mass migration, conquest, colonization, and other drastic population shifts. That's all for this week. Next Thursday, we'll be looking at economic activity into revenue streams when Martin presents the mechanics governing the Treasury and national debt. Lovely stuff. Before we go, though, we have dev comments. Let us get into dev comments. So, the graphics of each pop are hard to read. Yes, they are. I mentioned that. They're definitely a bit hard to read when presented in the context of tooltips. It worries me that there isn't a, oh, we'll fix that, or, oh, it looks better in the game, or, we're going to work on that. It's just a, yeah, no, it sucks. Please fix. Please fix. Don't just accept. Please fix. How will the age mechanic work exactly? Is there some age pyramid, or do individual pop ages be tracked, which sounds like a performance nightmare, or just X% will die per year? Yeah. X% will die for a year, so the latter. There's a slight bias to choose the illiterate members of the pop when deaths are resolved, which could either represent the fact that older members of your population tends to be more likely to be illiterate, or they couldn't read the warning labels on the factory floor, take your pick. But if a pop's education access decreases below their current literacy level, it doesn't matter how large that bias is, the net literacy rate will still go down. The older members of your population tends to be more likely to be illiterate. Yeah, I suppose, because as you progress, you're basically teaching if you're focusing on making people more literate, because that is the general trend of the era, you're not teaching the old people how to read, you're generally teaching the young ones how to read. Are the discrimination impacts on qualifications a replacement to the Vic-2 ban on industry in colonial states? I've been wondering how colonies will work, and it seems far more elegant mechanic. It is indeed related to that. During development, we also experimented with having hard requirements for certain professions, so the culturally discriminated could never turn into aristocrats, for example. This led to huge problems in recently conquered colonial territories, where the newly discriminated would be robbed of their land holdings, with the result that conquered farms and plantations became completely non-operational until accepted pops had the time and will to move in and take over operation. Sounds like a fun little side effect, but was actually anything but in practice. I was going to say, that seems like, yeah, no, that would be what happens. You conquer a place that you're, systemically racist against, and yeah, you're stealing land from the aristocrats. You're stealing jobs from the people, or just basically, like, fuck off. Get out of your jobs. You're no longer allowed. That kind of seems like it makes sense, but in the same way, this kind of geopolitical stuff isn't really racially based. On an individual level, sure, but, like, systems are generally a bit more whatever benefits us, rather than, I hate this group of people, so we're gonna fuck them over, So maybe they would allow the aristocrats of the discriminated against to continue because it benefits them. So I guess, yeah, no, it makes sense. Sounds like a fun side effect, but anything but in practice. I can agree with that, or I can understand that. What happens under the system is that the cowed and discriminated aristocrats gradually lose their qualifications to be aristocrats under these new laws, and will over time be replaced by pups deemed to be more suitable for the job. I assume the buildings reduce wages in order to return to the black won't run into the issue of reduced wages makes pop seek employment elsewhere, reduced workers reduce production reduces income, reduced income places buildings in the red, buildings reduce wages in order to maintain profits. Both because it would be expensive computationally and because it might cause a building to employ no one and produce nothing. So, the answer is reduced wages could result in pop seeking employment elsewhere, which reduces production. But this actually tends to result in a net gain for the remaining pops in the building, since it now pays fewer workers to make fewer goods, resulting in lower supply but retained demand, which means each unit produced and sold yields marginally more profit. So chronically unprofitable industries tend to find an equilibrium point where they can retain their current wage rate at the expense of not being able to achieve full employment. It seems then like buildings, instead of the current way that wages work in the modern world of you individually have a contract that you have with your employer, and that contract is, it's your wages generally stay the same until you get a new contract. It seems here that a building will have, this is the amount of money that we are going to pay on wages for our employees. If people leave, this pot still stays the same. It's just going to be spread for thicker. So people get more money if people leave, if that makes sense. And then they're able to reduce the size of this to a bit smaller based on, they want to lower wages because that's what capitalists do. It seems that's the way it's going to work. It's not a case of individual pops getting individual wages. It's a case of buildings have, we pay this amount in wages. That seems to be a bit better. That'll stop this. So yeah, cool. Will pops have any bias in demotion? For example, is it more likely for an aristocrat to demote to a farmer pop than a machinist, given the similarities? Demotion as such doesn't happen in the system. What happens is that an underpaid aristocrat will take any job they qualify for as long as it pays better. So it's more likely that an aristocrat will take a machinist job at a very profitable factory than become a farmer on a pretty humdrum wheat farm and vice versa. Alright. An aristocrat becoming a farmer. Yep, that's probably pretty unlikely. Some of these mechanics seem to represent only a capitalistic free wage market. Will cooperative or command economies be treated any differently, especially with the competition part and how they employ people? So, yeah, that's what I was kind of hoping to read about. Currently, there's no direct impact from the command economy law on qualifications or how pops are preferentially sorted when hiring them. Qualifications is best thought of as a mishmash of this pop could potentially or literally carry out this particular profession, given their current attributes, and would other pops in the country actually hire this pop for this profession, given their current attributes? First part of that equation doesn't really change under command economy or cooperative forms of economic organization. You absolutely need a certain level of education to become an academic or an engineer, and the greater number of people who know how to read and write, the greater the chance one of them will have the talents and tendencies to perform those jobs well. As for the second part, I'm not sure it'd make a difference either. People tend to be, well, people regardless of economic system, and people have biases about who they think would be a credible farm boy or clerk or military officer. So it's entirely possible laws like those will end up making a difference to qualification calculations before Victoria 3 is released, and these numbers and factors aren't final, but even so it probably won't make a huge impact. Alright. What does change in the equations quite a bit is more egalitarian access to the factors that produce qualifications. In a liberal and non-discriminatory society with a public school system and low wealth disparity, pops will accumulate qualifications a lot more equally on account of having more similar properties than in a discriminated and stratified society. Good answer, I think. So, yeah. There's still, yeah, because if you have a command economy versus a capitalist economy, really, you know, like the example given, you need an engineer still to do an engineer's job. And just because you have a different economic system doesn't mean that everyone is now suddenly qualified to be an engineer. So that makes sense to me. Obviously, you are the ones who have a feel for how this is balanced, but I'm shocked that the numbers seen are so weighted to consider current employment over anything else. I mean, for aristocrats, wealth is contributing 0.1 per point, literacy is 0.01 per point, and being officers is giving 9.71. So pops with a wealth of 80 and literacy of 100 would be, between those things, have as much contribution as just the factor of being an officer. And it's even more concerning for other job types which need actual skills. Seems like it will make getting a population with the qualifications you need mainly just dependent on having the more basic pops of that same type. Machinists to engineers, officers to aristocrats, shopkeepers, capitalists, etc. It seems unfortunate. Just to, before we look into the answer, why I think this is fine, right? To qualify for being an aristocrat, like, how are you going to be making the wealth and the literacy? It's going to be by having another job. And if you are a machinist or if you're a laborer or something, you're not generally going to be getting the wealth or the literacy required regardless. Going up through the ranks and then getting into the aristocracy is much more believable, let's say, than oh, a farmer somehow struck gold in his farm, and that turned him into an aristocrat because or maybe he inherited a lot of money, or he stole it, or he dug it up in his farm, and now he's an aristocrat. It doesn't really make any sense. There's no legitimacy behind it, or legitimacy based on previous, the existing aristocracy. But if you're an officer, jumping into the aristocracy seems like a much more smooth transition. And sure, being able to read and having a lot of money helps, but generally it's connections that get you into these high roller places. And yeah, it just seems like being an officer is having those connections. Factors and values are a quick work in progress, and the impact from current profession is indeed inflated at the moment compared to where it should be. Having said that, it's not necessarily the case that having wealth 20 means every point of wealth provides 0.1 to the algorithm. In this case of aristocrats, the algorithm currently looks like this. Requires wealth greater than 10 to be positive at all, otherwise it's reduced by -2. Add wealth negative... oh god, math. Wealth -10 divided by 5, add literacy rate. If officers or bureaucrats, multiply the current tally by 5. If not culturally accepted, reduced by 90%. Sure. Math, great. You read, yeah, whatever. So a well-to-do culturally accepted clerk with wealth 40 and literacy 80% would gain a base factor of 6.8 to their aristocratic qualifications, which is a very respectable figure without already being one of the 2 preferred types. And yeah, the algorithm is really hard to pass and we don't really expect players to keep these figures in their head. Good, because I have already forgotten them. This breakdown is more for auditing purposes than gameplay purposes. If the player wants to ensure they gain more qualifications for aristocrats in their population, they should look at the aristocrat description, which will explain the factors in more comprehensible terms, like potential rises with wealth and lesser degree by literacy. Alright. Either way, I don't agree with Joe here, so yeah. I see that steel mills are promoting machinists and engineers from qualified pops, but losing engineers to the war industry too quickly. I mean, what is too quickly? Maybe the war industry is very necessary right now because of the bloody war going on. How would you know that it's too quickly? This is conjecture. This is a complete, fabrication. So if the steel mills are gaining machinists but losing engineers, that'll make their production methods recipe stop working as well. So then they'll raise wages for engineers eventually. Do buildings raise wages for different jobs at different rates? That's a good question. Hope you're able to prevent the systems from locking up, for example, having a factory lose all its engineers and then having their budget deep in the red on account of inefficient machinists still drawing wages. So, buildings have a general wage rate. This is literally what I said earlier. I said a lot more words and didn't use the words wage rate. And professions have the wage weight that determines how large of a multiple of that rate they should get. So wages paid out are always proportional based on those weights. A building that needs more engineers and finds it can't attract them based on their low wage rate will raise the wage rate generally, not only for engineers. The latter would be cool, but there's so many moving parts already. Floating wages for each individual profession in each building is the stuff of designer nightmares, but maybe one day. Alright, with respect to the latter question, buildings will always aim for proportionality between professions. If a factory loses all its engineers and can't promote machinists or other professions to take over, it will start letting go of other employees until it returns to proportionality and profitability and can start competing again to get some of those engineers back. Alright. Good answer. Good question, good answer. Okay. If pops now have professions and not types, does that mean pops who don't have the correct type for a profession have malices? And this is together. Does that mean that education facilities promote pop types before they enter the workforce if you have it? So pops who don't have the qualifications for a profession cannot get hired for that profession. All profession changes occur at point of hire, driven by market forces. It is a good question though, because are there... I suppose if you want to have higher professionalized pops, engineers and such, and you're in an area that doesn't have any of those buildings, any of the previous, you are probably going to have to move through the ranks to actually get to that point, or have migration for engineers to come in. Because otherwise, like, a farmer into a labourer, into a machinist, into an engineer is going to be the fastest way to get engineers as their qualifications slowly rise up. But just going straight from farmer to engineer seems like it's going to be very unlikely. It doesn't seem like, second question here, education facilities promote pop types before they enter the workforce. I'm thinking what he's really asking here is, do pops, like, Are we a student pop, basically? Are we student pops and then we turn into machinists? No. I think that's what he's kind of meaning. Like, before the end of the workforce, yeah. And there's no malices because they just literally cannot perform the jobs that are asked of it. It does feel like, yeah, getting a new piece of land, say you're colonizing Africa, the scramble for Africa is happening, and you're colonizing somewhere that has a very low population that is not entirely equipped with any industry. No buildings are built there. You're not going to immediately be able to build fucking steel mills because you can't find the qualified pops for it. Which makes sense. You're going to have to either bring up the existing population or import your own population to work the buildings that you're going to build there. It's a progression-y thing. Is there a cap, as with Victoria 2, 5% for soldiers, 2% for officers, 4% for clergy, etc.? It's all based on requirements of the buildings as defined by their active production methods. That's better. That's better. Base it on the buildings. Does the urbanization mechanic encourage pops to move into these factories from the rural countryside? Only if those factories are more profitable, and they tend to be, and thereby capable of paying higher wages and the rural population qualify. Do national focuses work the same way as they did in Vic 2? No, we have decrees. I don't think we've heard anything about them yet. There's a decree to promote social mobility, which helps build qualifications in the state generally, but there's no encourage profession X type national focus, as this is driven by the needs of the buildings. Good. I really hated national focuses. I think they were absolutely awful. Decrees seem like I'm racking my brain to try and think if we've had any mention of decrees yet, but this here makes me think of Imperator Rome, because on a provincial level, you can change the governor policy, and social mobility just happens to be one of them. It could be that there is... Honestly, it does seem like something similar. I wonder if decrees are going to be paid for in some way. Maybe authority or something, bureaucracy to change a decree, or whether they're free to implement. It's a curious question. What's the difference between farmers and peasants? Farmers work on farms, peasants work on subsistence farms, right? Peasants are employed by subsistence farms only and satisfy most of the needs of the land outside the economy proper. Yeah, and then farmers are things like, I have specifically built a wheat farm, and farmers are working said wheat farm. In the tooltip in particular, engineers are the almost invisible. Yeah, this is talking about this first. Yeah, this because it's garbage. In the tooltip in particular, engineers are almost invisible. Farmers are hard to see. Machinists and laborers are to a point too. It's much better in the next tooltip, so I need to figure out the backgrounds or make the icons much brighter, maybe add color to differentiate them. Has he actually created a thing? Nope, that's not it. That's not it. There, that's it. Yeah, because these are a little bit better, but that's because there's no engineers here. Engineers is the hardest one to read. And this is the one, yeah, it's so garbage. It's really shit. So hopefully that's going to be changed, because it's just not good at this point. Why is my thing fucked up? Oh, is it only fucked up because... Why is that fucked up? What's happened here? That's not it. What's happened? Oh, I've just realized people have been unable to read most of the things I've been looking at. That is a big mistake on my part. My apologies. Just have to do it like that. Alright, fuck it. Moving back down again. So, the answer to this looks garbage is we'll ping our UX experts on this, thanks for the feedback. These smaller text icons for professions are pretty new and not fully polished yet, so hopefully we can address this. They're already on the case. Okay, here we go. This one I want to see. This is the new tooltip for it? Oh. Let's just go into a post. Let's go into here. Alright, fair enough. Okay. How will subsidies play into that? Will factories dynamically shift wages in command economies under subsidies, or will you be able to manually handle that? Factories will still dynamically shift the wage rate they pay out when subsidized, so it still orients itself properly in the dynamic economy. The government is then required to top up that wage to pay the workers at least a fair wage, if needed, and to cover any shortfall if material cost exceeds revenue from sales of produced goods. In return, the building maintains its full employment and throughput its qualifications allow. Okay. Well, this is a fatty answer to this question. So, while this isn't directly related to qualifications, you mentioned that buildings adjust their wages depending on their economic conditions, and that POPs will try to take jobs depending on those wages if there is a significant enough difference, including promoting based on their qualifications. Beyond the monthly qualification update, how much inertia is there in the system? Price shocks are possible, but this labour market is much less flexible than the commodity market due to contracts that need to move and the general human tendency to avoid change. This inertia has historically prevented economies from reorienting efficiently to changing market conditions, but sometimes buffered economic shocks. How would that look in the game? If it's checked too often, everyone can switch their employment. I expect things to quite swingy. So, deciding on the degree of inertia is a recurring design problem in the development of Victoria 3. Alright, basically, this is... earlier on in the dev diary, I'm not going to scroll up and try and find it, but it was said that if you got a machinist pop, and he's going to stay at his job in the steel mill unless he's offered a significant pay rise, significant being a very ill-defined term. It needs to be a pay rise, but just having a 0.01 pound per week pay rise is not going to be enough to swing them over. It's going to have to be significant enough to be worth it. How significant of that is, that's what the degree of inertia is here. On the one hand, we want stability, both in the sense of stability, so your country feels like a really breathing nation full of willful people, and the impact of stability on a dynamic economic simulation to ensure one part of it doesn't overreact to another and bring the whole thing crashing down. On the other hand, too much inertia makes the system feel unresponsive and removes the sense of cause and effect. To answer your specific question, productive buildings have a buffer called a cash reserve, into which it will deposit excess profits in a fair weather and use as a buffer to avoid drastic crashes when the wind goes the other way. Buildings with an empty cash reserve will act much more drastically than ones with a full reserve, but all buildings that lose money will take some cautious steps to try and fix the problem before they lose too much. This means we'll get both some inertia where the economy doesn't go belly up overnight because some machinists decide to relocate, and the cause and effect of seeing buildings start to lose money, wages starting to lower, and POPs starting to change careers. So it's interesting that they've basically got both. We've got high inertia and low inertia in the system itself, depending on whether the building is gaining or losing money or broke. And I think that's a really smart way of doing it. Because yeah, if it's low inertia, so basically if I'm putting random numbers here, but say the inertia is if you pay 10% over the rate that you currently have, the POP will move a job. Call that low inertia. That might be high, I don't know, but say it's 10%. They'll move, but then the wages of the old building will start to decrease because start to rise because they're now lacking that job that they just left, right? The machinist left the steel mill to go to the arms industry because it was paying more. Now that the steel mill is not got enough machinists, it's going to raise the wages for the machinists. So maybe it goes over that 10%, and the machinists that went to the steel mill that went to the arms industry go back to the steel mill, and it's going to ping pong around like that. That's low inertia. You don't want that. High inertia meaning the percent of wage increase that you need to want to move over is higher, would feel unresponsive. But if a building starts a building starts losing money, it's going to really drastically increase the wages that will get it over the amount. So maybe it's going to work out like that. I don't know. It's a very elegant solution, I think, to a really interesting problem. But on to the second question of this fatty question. Is there any distinction in the aristocrat and capitalist profession other than professions? Does a building production method need these professions to operate? How does that correlate with the not yet explained mechanic that these pops provide the investment pool to build these buildings in the first place? I would assume that these pops are the owners of the buildings they financed. Obviously, there is a level of abstraction going on here, but it seems strange to me that more people qualified to be capitalists are promoted because a factory needs more owners. If that's the case, what does the need for capitalists in a factory represent? Intuitively, I would say a factory runs just as well if it's owned by a fewer than more people. I would agree with that. So, why are capitalists necessary? They're required. Aristocrats and capitalists are required, and they are required proportionally to other professions in the building. While it's arguably unrealistic, how many aristocrats do you really need to own the land for people to work it productively? 0. After all, but there's an unfortunate side effect from not doing things this way, such as farms full of labourers but no aristocrats to siphon off the profits, being able to pay astronomical wages. And then when some aristocrats move in and take over the land, the building is suddenly deep in the red because aristocrats need to be paid their share. This then leads to the farmers and labourers using guillotines on the aristocrats and getting them out of there, and then them getting their, getting this back in the black. This then leads to metas where the factories that develop qualifications for aristocrats are artificially thralled to ensure simple farms provide amazing wages without having to engage in any form of ownership reform. Disproportionality between professions tends to throw the whole balance off, so we avoid it like the plague. Regarding capitalist investments, it helps to think of a building as an industrial sector, not a single factory. Capitalists invest in expanding the manufacturing industry, which creates opportunities for other companies to move in and start businesses, which leads to more capitalists. Fair enough. So, yeah, it's unrealistic, but it's necessary. Makes sense. Because the areas where it happens, and it should happen because it was realistic for it to happen, if you don't have an unrealistic baseline, it's going to break. Sure. Okay. Third question. Does the fact that a pop is qualified to promote to a more socially prestigious profession but lacks the economic conditions to do so plays a role in other sections of the game? For example, imagine there's a lot of machinists who are qualified to promote to engineer, but the country currently does not have any additional jobs for engineers. Does the game consider promoting from machinist to engineer something that's socially desirable in itself, and would that fact lead to unhappiness, political position, and emigration, or is all that a function of the wage difference between machinists and engineers? In Victoria 3, pops never change profession unless a building offers them a job different to what they currently have. In this, pops are perfectly rational actors and will only take jobs that pay better, regardless of perceived social status. However, with increased pay tends to come more political strength and other benefits, so that dimension isn't completely ignored either. Alright. Concerning wages, will trade unions and strike actions be represented in some way? Trade unions and its interest group, present in every country, it tends to be weak at game start, can often become very relevant in industrializing nations. Regarding strikes, they're present in the game, you will learn more about them later. Nice. That's what you like to see. So the Rockefellers, JP Morgan, Carnegie and other trusts, and robber barons never engage in such behavior. That's not going to be modeled. I don't know what that's referring to. It's not going to be modeled systemically, at least, because it's no fun as a player to delay the tracks and build the infrastructure for a new steel mill and have the existing steel mill owners decide the production won't be increased because that might lead them to becoming individually less wealthy. Okay. Can qualifications be tied to technology? Like, more machinists can qualify to be engineers in London, where the technology is more advanced and concept of a steam engine is widely known and accepted than Cairo. Not only being dependent on the literacy and integration, literate people study different things which are affected by the society we live in. It's not included in the set of factors currently, but it's very easy to add or mod in. Alright. Yeah, I mean, qualification tied to technology theme. Yeah, that seems like a reasonable question. What will unemployed pop's profession be? Just like what they were last employed as? What they were last employed as, yes. Also gives them precedence for any new jobs created as types and states. So you can have an unemployed engineer. That seems like a very reasonable way of doing it. You have unemployed engineer rather than unemployed pop, right? Unemployment is not a profession. I like it. Why no artisan profession to simulate cottage industry as in Vic 2? Is this modeled another way? It's modeled another way, alright. Do buildings in the red only reduce wages, or do they also lay off workers? The latter would seem to be a better simulation of individual firms presented by the building going bust and firms downsizing to reduce costs, which happens more often in the real world than wage cuts. We used to have them do both, but the problem with that is since wage rate is not set by the player but by the building. The building size is controllable by the player in the sense that they can pay to expand it. If the player pays money and time to expand a building, which then won't hire, because with the current wage rate it put into the red, it's a very unsatisfying experience and leads to a lot of analysis paralysis. It's much more satisfying experience to expand a building, see a building wage rate decrease somewhat, and see some of those employees move to other jobs to make room for poorer employees. With this approach, we also don't get the weird downward spirals in the economy where lower supply of tools due to layoffs lead to more profit in other manufacturing industries, which in turn lead to layoffs, etc. It sounds cool, but it's very annoying when it happens. Fair enough. Are serfs considered slaves or peasants? They're considered peasants. Vicky 3's definition of a slave is a person who's wholly owned by another person and can be bought and sold as property. This excludes serfs, most indentured servants, etc., who are instead represented as the profession they're carrying out. Let's say a country wants to restrict social mobility. If you're a farmer, then you and your descendants stay farmers. If you're a soldier, then you and your descendants stay soldiers. Could this system model that in some way? If we wanted to do something like that where there's a modifier that can be added to, well, anything. Laws, institutions, buildings via event options, decisions, etc. that reduces qualification gain across the board. But typically we assume that the baseline is the lowest possible social mobility and instead give penalties, we give bonuses to those things that provide better social mobility across a nation. Same effect but has a better feel, especially since pops having good qualifications is virtually never a bad thing from the player's perspective, it just gives them more options. And 74 more items. This is the same UI problem that CK3 has, except now even more massive. Yeah, one of the things with CK3 is that drop-down menu, the main, the button at the top that drops down and tells you a bunch of stuff, and then it cuts off, and there's a bunch more things in it. I think that's what he's referring to. I mean, there's a bunch of places where CK3 does this, but yeah. There needs to be a better way of displaying this information, or the amount of critical data that warrants informing the player needs to be cut down. Vicky 3 is looking more like a spreadsheet. Yeah, I don't agree with that. And I also don't agree that the 74 more items, that information doesn't seem like super necessary. There is a much better way to display this information one level up where it's aggregated. Our philosophy is always to aggregate so the player can make good decisions on the right level, but also provide ways to delve deeper into the raw data on demand. I agree with that. It's pretty clear that is the case. Like I said when I was looking at it, the thing at the top is the important bit, and it's only the very sweaty math nerds, I say with full affection, that are going to care about the rest of the bar. Because it's going to mean nothing for 99.99% of people. It's just there for the 0.001%. Or there to prove that the aggregate at the top is meaningful for the people who care about that. Buildings won't engage in any layoffs, just a reduction in wage rate. So how do pops become unemployed? Unemployment occurs in instances where some employees leaves and proportionately cannot be easily restored. For example, a couple of smaller businesses in the sector closed down because a bunch of engineers went elsewhere, rendering the machinists, labourers and capitalists temporarily inconvenienced for a few weeks until they can find other employment. When there is inbound migration but insufficient jobs and or insufficient qualifications among the immigrants, and when automation production methods are activated that make a chunk of the workforce redundant. Alright? From a UI immersion perspective, those are two different perspectives. There's a place where I think Vic 2 did it better than Vic 3 looks like it's doing. Having pops represented by pictures instead of people, pictures of people makes them feel more like people, while V3's icons lose that. Sure, but Vicky 3's a profession isn't a person, it's just a part of a person's ideology. Pop icons in Vicky 2 were great for this agreed. The reason we didn't use this approach in Vicky 3 are threefold. So, static icons that look like people could not possibly even begin to represent the diversity of people all around the world. Vicky 2's icons to be immersive when I play Britain, but pretty immersion shattering when I play Bhutan. That's a fair point. On the other hand, we don't want different icons for different cultures either, since the point of an icon is to be instantly recognizable in between different game sessions. Okay. One thing though. Vicky 2's icons to be immersive when I play Britain, but immersion shattering when I play Bhutan. So, this here, medallion, I'm assuming it's some monarch's head. It may be Queen Victoria. I don't know. I don't recognize the specific. Right? It could be it's any female monarch, I guess. specifically for playing the country where this particular medallion is from. Like, I'm guessing it's Queen Victoria. If I'm wrong, then whatever. Playing as Britain, it's immersive. Playing as Bhutan, getting this particular medal doesn't seem quite as immersive. Not gonna lie. At least they're changing this to be a bit more broad. But yeah, I mean, this specifically is the one I'm looking at saying, yeah, but you're not doing it there, are you? And finally, 3, we have the technological luxury of actually being able to display each pop as a rendered portrait of a unique person, which reduces the need to use profession icons to give you a sense of a pop's personhood by approximately 97%. Sure. Yeah, being able to show a pop as an actual person with a portrait and stuff, I do think that is better. So the question was whether a pop can add new qualifications simultaneously, not whether it already carries around multiple qualifications in its pool. From the screenshots posted, it's not clear whether the pop can add +4 to machinists and +2 to aristocrats this same month, or whether it fills the pool of qualified machinists first and then starts to fill aristocrats. So qualifications for all professions are updated for each pop once per month. There's no queue where they have to fill up qualifications for one profession before moving to another. Yeah. How big will the cash reserve be? Will the size be static or dynamic? If dynamic, blah, 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 all of that. Size is static by building type, but it depends on the building level. So a level 3 textile mill has 3 times the cash reserve as a level 1 textile mill. It does not disappear under command economies, no. That's talking about the cash level, or the cash reserve of buildings, which was asked a little bit up a bit. In real life, most socialist economies subsidize full or almost full employment, even if a given factory is unprofitable. Will this be simulated in game? Can you spend your national treasury on this? To be honest, I don't believe the VIC-3 as it is now can convincingly simulate a socialist economy, because it will require a whole new economic system to be programmed in with such key distinctions as totally flat money, non-convertible money, ban on conversion of bank deposits into cash for enterprises. What I would say about that is every socialist economy that's existed has been very different, right? There has to be a level of abstraction because honestly every economy is different in a way, but like the Soviet Union's economy was different to Maoist China's economy. It is different to Venezuela or Cuba or any of them, right? There's not just a way that socialist economies work. It's not a thing, right? And this is where I get the ANCAPs in my comments saying, oh yeah, but socialist economies, they don't work in general, so it doesn't matter. Fuck off. But yeah, I don't know, it's like, in real life, most socialist economies subsidize for almost full employment. Yeah, some, most. It's hard to go into specifics here. We'll talk more about this later, but in short, it is simulated via the subsidy mechanics work in a command economy. You're correct that some of the fundamental distinctions between capitalist and communist systems of organizing the economy cannot be captured with our market mechanics, since it's completely driven by supply and demand affecting goods prices in ways that don't make a clear distinction between sales price and value. Alright. If potentially qualified pop promotes to a profession requiring higher literacy or wealth, does this lower the literacy rate of the pop they originated from? Yes. Literacy rate shown is actually a computation. The value stored in the pop is how many of its members are literate. These literate members are transferred in greater quantities if the pop is hired into a job that requires greater literacy, so it will in effect drain the source's pop literacy rate. That's cool. That's nice. It's basically it's brain drain, right? That's the term for it, right? If I understand this correctly, let's look at this example. There are 2 job opportunities in a state, both competing for the same workers. Let's say they each want 100 and there's 100 in total state. One is slightly more profitable than the other. Over time, if nothing else changes, we'll see an equilibrium in which the profitable workplaces is filled to 100% and the other has 0. And what happens is 1 increases its wages to compete against 2 and because 1 is more profitable, it could do so longer than 2, winning the race. However, 1 still diminishes profitability because of high wages. My question is, will the now empty 2 keep pushing up wages for 1 until it's demolished, or do I have an error in my example? Alright, there's a limit to how many pops can be hired by a building each week. In week 1, workplace 1 will gain hiring precedence and will result in the best workers until it's reached its limit. If there's more qualifying workers after that, workplace 2 will recruit them up to their limit. If the building manages to hire, it won't increase wages Now, in week 2, Workplace 1 has increased their throughput and net profit, and as a result has decreased somewhat. It won't try and increase wages since it's been successful in recruiting new workers. This makes it comparatively less desirable than Workplace 2, which might have increased its wages and as such get precedence over 1 this time around. That's cool. I like that. Especially getting, a limit to how many can be hired each week certainly solves that. A lot of problems, I think. Over time, the most productive and profitable building will be able to hire more workers than the less profitable building, but they'll both get opportunities to increase their throughput, and for as long as they have profit to spare and job opportunities to fill, they continue to compete on wages to steal workers from each other. As from owner wages, they're distinct from dividends. These are the excess profits paid out to shareholders after cash reserve deposits have been made. So owners take their fixed share of wages alongside everyone else in the building, but then get paid a weekly bonus depending on how well the building is doing. Alright. Yeah, no, that seems good. This seems like a good workaround for the potential problem here. Probably out of the scope of the dev diary, but how does this interact with POPs out of state? If there's labour shortage, will it start pulling in qualified personnel from different states? If there's a labour surplus, will it start pushing out the unemployed to other states? At the moment, there's no explicit "there are job opportunities over there, time to move" mechanic, since that also requires to assess the wage paid for each of those job opportunities compared to the current wage the POP is being offered to not get weird effects. Essentially, to model it perfectly would be to assess each opportunity for each POP across a whole market, and that would be too CPU heavy and quite unrealistic, given that there are huge barriers to packing up and moving even to an adjacent state in the same country. However, the standard of living, which we'll learn more about in a couple of weeks, of POPs in a state does affect its migration attraction. Indirectly, this means that if a state has a good amount of labour competition and therefore relatively high wages and reasonable access to consumer goods and government amenities that affect the measure, it'll be a better state to move to. In addition, unemployed POPs are more likely than employed POPs to take the risk of moving to another state in search of greener pastures. This does create the effect you're describing, it just takes a longer route to get there. And we're done. Good lord. That's long dev diary. I don't know if it's the longest, but holy shit, it's a lot of reading there. Easily the video is over an hour long. Wow, okay, there's a lot to parse, there's a lot to think about. My initial thoughts are that it's going to take another read. No, my initial thoughts are that it's doing two things at once. It's giving enough of a nitty-gritty for the people who need the nitty-gritty, that they can look at all of the numbers, they can right-click to open context menus to look at even more numbers, they can do the math themselves, they can look in here and there's 74 more items to make sure that this number at the top is correct. They can do all of that if they want to. And at the same time, it also looks like they've made it so that you don't have to. That you don't have to have a second monitor with a fucking Excel spreadsheet open, look with different sheets for every single industry in your nation to play the game. And that's fantastic. Victoria 2 was heavily criticized by a lot of people for, oh, you need a fucking economics degree to play this game. It's obviously false, but that is a general kind of feeling about the game from certain people, that it's too complicated. It looks like there is equal amounts of complicated, but also a lot of it seems to be aggregated. Like, you don't need to individually calculate all of this because it's done for you at the top, and this is what you need to know. This is the bit that's necessary. And it seems like that is going to be the case all over the board. Do I need to know exactly how many aristocrats are, they're going to be aristocrats based on other things from the Sudanese? Like, no, I don't need this information to play the game. I don't need this information to understand what's going on. But if I want to, then I can look, and maybe I can do something about it. If something starts to go wrong, there is information there that I can look at to then understand, oh, that's why this is happening, and this is how I can fix it. For example, changing the cultural discrimination against the Sudanese if I'm losing aristocrats. But it's not something that is super necessary to, like, laser focusing on every single little detail. Like, it's an economic simulation. doesn't mean you have to understand, you know, every single bit of information inside it. A lot of it seems to, you know, nicely run on its own, and that's a good thing. Yeah, my only complaint is honestly the UI here. Other than that, I'm happy. But are you happy? Are you happy? No, seriously, are you happy? You doing okay? Let me know in the comment section below if you are enjoying this dev diary, if you like what you've seen here, if you think employment and qualifications are way too bloody big brain for you and me, or if this is the kind of nitty-gritty that you're really looking for in a Victoria game. Is this exciting, or is this like, I understood none of this, but I'm going to enjoy the game anyway? Is that what you're like? Let me know in the comment section below. But until then, thank you very much for watching. If you want more Victoria 3 news and updates, stick around, sub to the channel, like the video, comment, all that kind of good stuff helps me out. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.